Platonism and Stoicism, the Stoa. It would seem that over the past few decades we've had a resurgence of interest in Stoicism. However, the Stoicism that is preached, followed, admired today is a Stoicism in a context. As all purported returns to earlier thought, today what we have is the original in a new context. Let us consider what the original is all about and why we have had a return to, or a purported return to the original, why Stoicism is fashionable today, and how, it may turn out, the appeal to Stoicism works very well with the rise of a new world order, or globalism, or technocracy, to be polite in denominations. Let us consider first the origin of Stoicism. Stoicism arises as a school, the Stoa, the porch, under which philosophers walked and discussed, in the aftermath of Plato. So we cannot understand Stoicism properly without keeping in mind its antecedent. Stoicism involves a reading of Plato, a response to the Platonic lesson. And here Stoicism returns more precisely to the figure of Socrates. It is not enough to have the world of ideas. We need the Platonic world of eternal forms. We need to recover the philosophical life represented by Socrates. So there is a kind of idealization among the Stoics of the figure of Socrates. Socrates is this stern, pure man someone who has purged himself of all of the vices, the passions of ordinary vulgar men. He can now be an island unto himself. The return to Socrates is not straightforward, however. There is a kind of rereading of Socrates, of the Socratic life, in light of the world of ideas. In reality, this rereading harkens back to a pre-Socratic philosophy. Pre-Socratics. How so? Well, the pre-Socratics, whom Aristotle refers to variably as philosophers of nature or materialists, were monastic people who sought to escape the world of illusions, of conventions, by returning contemplatively to a universal order of things, a cosmos. Right? Then they would speak of this universal order in, well, we could call them poetic terms. So they would say, well, everything is fire, everything is water, everything is air, everything is mind. And then Socrates comes along and says, well, that makes sense. But however, now we need to establish the relationship between our situation and this mind, the universal mind. How do we get from the universal mind, which is one, to the plurality of phenomena that make up our everyday life experience? He says, well, The pre-Socratic doesn't explain this, doesn't account for this gap. Now, with the Stoics, you have we could say, a synthesis of the pre-Socratic and Socrates. How does this work out? Well, remember the world of eternal forms that Plato had spoken of? Well, these forms are understood to be ultimately unified in a mind of the universe, the order of the universe, anima mundi, right, in Latin. Now, this universal order is to be a model for us. The Socratic life is a life that mirrors, reflects directly, being purged of blemishes, of sins, we could say, right? Of vices, of impurities. It mirrors directly the eternal order of things. Stoicism. Why did Plato not call for that? And why do we not find this in Plato himself? The reason is that with Plato, the universal order is a kind of way of speaking. It's a kind of dream, right? Is a poetic figure of speech, you could say. We find this in the Timaeus, right? A geometrical form, we might even say, that in turn serves as stage for reflection. Reflection upon what? Upon a reality that is hidden in man and to man, the sacred. So, Socrates is not so much to reflect the eternal image there, the form, but to reflect upon it, to see in it a reflection of problems that are on the level of man. Fundamental problems, fundamental questions. So Socrates asks questions. He is understanding the fundamental problems primarily in terms of questions, not of answers that somehow silence the questions, that solve the questions. The questions are their own solution. These questions are alive, and Socrates lives the life of those questions. And he sees a kind of peace in those questions. Not in the eternal order of things, not in his mimicking that eternal order. He is open to the eternal, but then he could question the eternal as it is given, and he would see in it the fundamental questions. Now, it may turn out that the fundamental questions are defined or are described in terms of the eternal forms. Well, of course. But that is, again, a manner of speech. The manner of speech, what is said, is a reflection of what is unsaid. Now, with Stoicism, the eternal order is the ultimate reality. What is given, what is said, right? If only mysteriously, you could say, it is the ultimate reality, and we need to mirror it. It is straightforward. In comes Christianity, however, that shows that there is a gap between the two that the Stoic alone cannot, through his own resources, cannot overcome. So, with Christianity, typically we see that the Stoic is considered to be blind to the ethical dimension of life, to the cross, Now, you could say, well, the Stoic has his own cross. Yes, but he gives it to himself. With Christianity, the cross is received. And life is not about mirroring the universal cosmos. It is about an ascent. This ascent is missing from Stoicism. Right? The ascent out of this world to the higher world, the heavenly world, which is not properly understood in terms of merely eternal forms out there that serve as a pattern, just a static pattern, as it were, for our world. Everything comes to life with Christianity. The other world comes to life. And it is a kind of mirror of, well, what this world is supposed to be. An image of what this world is supposed to be. Now, without indulging too much in the Christian response, primarily because we're here to speak about Stoicism per se, let us consider a modern return to Stoicism. Christianity, it should be noted, does tend to, this is not necessarily an intended result, it does tend to lead to a diminishing of the importance of the Socratic life. Why is that? The Socratic life is somehow inscribed in, doctrinal patterns, so that the Socratic questioning tends to be, overshadowed by its answers or formulations of these answers. Now, formulations may be there to legitimize, to vindicate the questions. Nevertheless, there is a kind of halo that covers the Socratic life. Halo of mystery, even. But what is most important here to understand the modern response to, or the modern return to Stoicism and the modern response to Christianity, is Christianity's purging of Platonism, of a Stoic temptation, we could say. For Christianity, it's a Stoic temptation, which is this notion that the philosopher is an island unto himself, and that he can establish his life purged from all sin, from all stain, from all, fear, in direct communion with a universal order of things. This direct communion we do not find in Socrates himself. For Socrates himself, at least as we find him in the early accounts, is a man who deals with evil without solving it in a higher order. This doesn't mean that Socrates is troubled by evil. It simply means that he is dealing with it, facing it, confronting evil, piercing it, without being at home wherever he stands. He is, in a strange way, an otherworldly man. His figure is magnified in that of the Gospels. Right? He is in this world, but he's not of this world. Right. But now, The modern return to Stoicism seeks to recover that independence of the philosopher, of the philosophical life. This does not involve the return to Socrates himself, or the early Socrates, and the early representations or accounts of Socrates, most notably that of Plato, but also Xenophon. What we have here is a return to this monastic aspect, not the ethical aspect, the monastic aspect of Stoicism. What is wrong with Christianity? It does not allow for the autonomy of philosophy. This is something that we find in the likes of Kant, for example, right? But what is wrong with that monastic? It does not take into account the Christian challenge. You can't do it on your own, or at least you can't mirror the eternal directly, unreflectively, would argue the critics of Stoicism. So what does the modern philosopher, the modern even return to Stoicism involve? It says, well, we have to correct old Stoicism and have a new Stoicism. A new Stoicism that is going to face the hiatus between our present condition and the eternal forms. How do we do that? Well, there's a whole reconceptualization of all the terms. Right? The eternal order of things turns out to be an ideal that we project, right, outside of ourselves from what? The fundamental questions, the fundamental problems, the fundamental reality of things? No, but from the structures of human consciousness. Right? We need to get back to the structures and thus the logic of human consciousness. And through this return, which is a critical return, right, of the reason that tends toward the universal forms, what we have is a safeguarding of philosophy from the existential, right, element that separates us from the eternal. What is at stake here? Let us consider again, Kant is paradigmatic here, right? As a modern response to Christianity and a return to Stoicism. The new Stoic, for indeed we have a new Stoic here, must confront his world, the existential environment, the context. Right? The genesis of things, not merely the essence of things. How does he do that? He does this by seeing that the eternal order is not just there, it's just as a model. It is a provisional model. This provisional model helps us transform the existential environment in which we find ourselves into a world that is a kind of synthesis of the eternal and the temporal. This sets the stage for Hegel, right, and historicism. So the job of the Stoic now is to transform this world into a new world. It is not to have this world purge it, right? And to mirror directly the eternal. It is to synthesize this world and the eternal world. This synthesis and the demand to bring this about is what distinguishes the modern Stoic from the ancient Stoic. The ancient Stoic is not a progressive, not an evolutionary fellow. He tends to be monastic. The modern Stoic is a progressive Stoic who is, in some respect, monastic, but this monasticism is not fundamental. He seeks to have a synthesis of the monastic and the social. He seeks to establish a new world on the principle of individuality, of monasticism, right? On principle of, the little island. So everyone is an island unto himself, but integrated into a society of islands. This is the origin of our atomistic society. Now, this is possible, of course, in a mechanical world in which, as Kant reminds us, everyone is integrated, both angels and demons, and perhaps especially demons, for they do not question this order. As a small corollary to this, we find that in today's revival of Stoicism, or appeal, at any rate, to Stoicism, the question of evil is bracketed altogether. There is no evil. It's all in your head. But for the ancient Stoics, evil is this hiatus between our situation and the eternal. So we have to overcome it by purging ourselves from this evil. There's no purgation from evil in the modern Stoic. We're just building a world that is indifferent to evil because it has overcome the gap, because it occupies the gap between the temporal and the eternal. In fact, the two poles are synthesized in this emergence, the emergence of this new world. So this is what we have today when we speak about Stoicism. It's a new Stoicism, and we could see accounts of the emergence of this new Stoicism already in the work of Shakespeare. Not in the respect that Shakespeare is advocating this emergence of a new Stoic world or new Stoicism, but in the respect that he is exposing its limits, its genesis also, right? It's essential genesis, what it's all about, so we can see past it, beyond it, right? Or through it. So, hopefully, this brief account has exposed what we're dealing with today when we speak about Stoicism. There are original limitations to the ancient Stoics, and the modern Stoics acknowledge them, whether they're aware of this or not, by contextualizing the ancient. Right? This contextualization, of course, involves this, the modern critique of reason, and so it would be a good idea to return to Kant to see how he addresses Stoicism and its limitations in the light of the Christian challenge. He's not returning to Christianity, obviously, but he is trying to account for the Christian challenge in order to establish a new form of Stoicism. A new form of Stoicism, incidentally, and we could close on this point, that integrates the Epicurean. And again, we find this exposed quite well in Shakespeare. The Epicurean insights, the Epicurean life, Epicureanism, and an Epicurean conception of the world is integrated within the new Stoicism. How is this done? Well, I explained this in an article, and I might include a link to the article which explores how Shakespeare exposes this dynamic between Stoicism and Epicureanism, the synthesis that is proper to the modern world. In very provisional terms, in very synthetic terms, we could say that the Epicurean sees that we should be at ease in this existential context that separates us from the eternal. And that this is the ultimate reality. There is no eternal world. There is no merely fallen world, to speak in Christian terms. We do not need to mirror a higher reality. We need to be at home in the best of all possible ways in the existential. And one could reflect, even without studying Shakespeare, we can begin to reflect on this way, the modern way, to bring the two together, the Epicurean and the Stoic. This is the birth of modern progressivism. But we'll leave it at that for now. Blessings.